Thank you again for being here today, both in person and on Zoom. We have that sitting meditation at the beginning, the 30 minutes. It often feels tempting to just continue for the rest of the meeting. You know, that we could just sit. To just sit in silence would perhaps be, would be time well spent, and certainly a good way to, when we look into the teachings, if we're looking at, say, the precepts, or in this case the 10 parameters or 10 perfections, a really good way to maintain the precepts or to exemplify the precepts would be to sit meditation, right? A way to maintain our present expression in a way that is in alignment with the way things are and is not creating distortion. I mentioned looking at these parameters and seeing renunciation there as the what is it now? The third one of 10. A couple of different systems in typically in Theravadan tradition. We maybe look at 10. Mahayana, it's often 6. They both reach back to the same era. It's something that was seems to have developed later than the Buddha's lifetime. So it wouldn't have been something that the Buddha particularly taught. Right, but these came to be seen as characteristics of an awake or enlightened person. Originally, the characteristics that people recalled that the Shakyamuni Buddha had. He had these qualities of self, which came to be seen as the 10 paramis, the 10 perfections. And these qualities of self, they do have something of a linear, they do have a linear quality, like something of a beginning, a middle, and an end in one sense, but in another, it's all of these parameters, these perfections are mixed together, and we're really somewhere on that spectrum, practicing all of these to some degree, all at the same time. But interestingly, just recapping with the beginning, they began with a commitment to dana or generosity, right? Much more than the act of like a monetary contribution or giving a gift, a decision being made in a human being's heart that I wish the best for everyone, including this one here, but just on a fundamental level, I wish to use this opportunity of a human life for good purpose, to live well, and to make an offering of my life and the skills that perhaps I have and what I can bring, in order that myself, perhaps family, work, people around us, colleagues, that broadly people can share in that benefit. So at the root there is that commitment that says, hey, I think we can do better as a group of people, as a community, as human beings, and we can move in a positive direction. That requires a commitment to a generosity of heart. The opposite to that is a purely a kind of what's in it for me and what can I get out of it, self-centered approach. So turning that over, and then as we go to the second parameter, we see okay, ethical conduct. We're going to need some guidelines. We're going to need some guardrails. Right? We're going to need to arrive at some common ways of acceptable ways to be and to practice, and things that are not acceptable and things to avoid within a community, within a human experience, in order that we can foster this growth and this more positive trajectory. And then we come to the next one, which is a renunciation, or in the Pali, Nekkhama. I think it's important to touch on that. Really, in its roots, if we look at our meditation tradition and all modern Dharma traditions, I think trace their roots to a founder, to the Buddha. Kind of a helps as just a point of contact, like an original founder, someone who really exemplified certain qualities, no matter if some of those may be more legendary or even apocryphal in certain ways. With time and distance, there tends to be a deification of religious leaders or spiritual leaders that takes place. But we know that somebody, Shakyamuni Buddha, somewhere around 6th century BCE in northern India, was a spiritual teacher of enormous talent and depth. I think that's I would think indisputable. Somebody who was able to really coalesce deep insight into the human experience, and from that be able to make a diagnosis of what causes suffering, and then formulate a practice vehicle to help navigate that territory. That takes somebody of real talent. It's very, very difficult to do that. But the early community and Shakyamuni Buddha's life himself was grounded in renouncing the world. Right? It's like the Buddha renounced position and status and even family life. Right? Was somebody who left behind much more than just material trappings to just focus on practice, on what is this curious reality, what is this being, what is this human life. He renounced other things in order to concentrate on that one question. And this was in an era in northern India where the renunciate tradition was already decades or even hundreds of years old, where people would just concentrate purely on the spiritual life. Right? In the early, like in the Hindu tradition at that time, it was understood, there was the belief that if they weakened the body, then the spirit grew stronger. So then there was a whole ascetic tradition, which still continues now in India and other areas of the world, to deny the body certain things like food and other things in order to kind of strengthen the spirit. It said that the Buddha went very deep with that practice, almost to the point of death, but was unable, didn't find that was a vehicle ultimately for liberation. And yet when the early communities formed around the Buddha, again, they were renunciate communities in that people left to become monks and nuns, gave away all material possessions, begged for food, and lived a very stripped down and minimal existence. Right? So we have that early Buddhism. If we fast forward a few hundred years from that early tradition of maybe 500, 600 years or so, when the paramitas are being developed more as a teaching vehicle, then the sangha had really grown and developed to include not just strict leaving society renunciates, but to include householders, families, people living and working in society, but wishing to kind of avail themselves of of Buddhism, of a way to navigate being a human being. So then it starts to grow broader, and that's when these qualities come in. So we don't need, that's the good news. You don't need to sell your car tomorrow or any of these things, right? In order to continue to give everything away in order to live a life that's aligned with Dharma practice or spiritual practice through this particular approach. There are different ways to look at this world renunciation. Again, the early Buddhism's really coming out of a place where the diagnosis was life is dukkha or dissatisfactoriness, and there is a lot of suffering. And you can imagine, maybe it feels a little bit more like our culture likes to hide the realities of a human life, like the old age, sickness, and death parts. Let's push those to the side. But I think I could say that in 5th century BCE northern India, those were very much more in your face. They'd have been very clear around. And so, again, coming out of this early Hindu worldview, there was a sense of we're stuck on this cycle of rebirth, going around and around, and there's a lot of suffering, and there's a kind of a stop the world, I want to get offness to it. Like, we need to step out of this cycle and enlighten ourselves or come to a place where we can align with a more absolute or eternal principle. Again, so early tradition, and now we're looking at it perhaps with more of a Mahayana look at what are we talking about when we're talking about renunciation. I always like to look up the actual word that's being translated, look at the etymology and see how that word developed that was chosen for the translation. That's always interesting and can help us. So some early kind of definitions, renunciation is to give up something, to discontinue something, or to surrender. Also later had to abandon a belief or opinion. Right? So, and you could, just looking at the etymology of the word, you could see how it changed through the Middle Ages, and also enters a period where renunciation was often something that was forced onto people. Like a public, you would have to publicly renounce a religion, or publicly renounce, like renunciation being used as a way to like kind of control, to force people to conform, to not to even believe in something different that's coming from the outside, right? So it's kind of a loaded word. When I read that word renunciation, I'm like, oh, that's like a curious word, right? In the Mahayana, you could say more the way we look at renunciation is we're not giving up things because we should. You should give that up because somebody said so. Of a group of people, something coming from the outside says you shouldn't do that. You should renounce that. But rather, looking into the reality of our life from a place of wisdom, we can find for ourselves those things that don't serve, those things that are not helpful, or those things which are downright detrimental to our life and the life of others. And that's more the spirit of identifying those things and stepping back and eventually perhaps even giving those things up fully. So again, beginning in generosity and committing to living an upright life through good ethics. Now moving into a place of seeing into our nature, and as human beings, we are desirous creatures, right? In many different ways. Like, and often a fundamental one for us as human beings is we desire things to be different than they are. On some level, every day. Like, or I should say for myself, I would like things to be different than they are. I desire conditions to be different. And that's certainly never changed. In all the years that I've practiced, or however many hours of meditation, I'm still wanting the world to be different than it is. Right? And on a relative level, on a human level, that's always the way that it is. But on an absolute or intrinsic level, the world is always the way that it is. Before our desire to change it, we can see deeply into the reality of our experience now, and this is where the acceptance and the surrender takes place. Not a surrender to someone or something, but the active surrender of seeing the world, this self, just as is, and accepting it without fault. And, so in our meditation, again, that is a wonderful way to refine this perfection of renunciation, right? To sit, and then the what we have to renounce there in our sitting meditation is the fixed me identity self that is always thinking, comparing, planning, finding fault with this experience, running the narrative, right? I'm thinking, are we on the same page? Is that just me, or do you also have that kind of going on, right? There is that one who is always finding fault in some way, picking and choosing, right? As human beings, that's really hardwired into us. We can see that sometimes it's better with desire, for instance, to accept some short-term pain for longer-term gain. But that doesn't really come naturally to us. As the more like just kind of primate that I am here, it's like I look at this in terms of something like if I just over summer I thought I got to lose some weight, gaining some weight, getting a little, just drop a few pounds, and then sort of start to adjust the diet or what I want to eat, and then things that I don't want to eat, and immediately, just in a small way, start to run into just how difficult that is. I remember looking up, I was, kind of absurdly, I thought, well, why is it the things that taste great are bad for me? Let me just throw that into the, ask the computer that. Like I didn't know that, which is quite embarrassing, and I read and it says, things that are like a lot of sugar or a lot of fat, your body says calorie dense, fantastic. Eat as much of that as you can. Because in our evolutionary life, you don't know if you're going to not be around tomorrow because you're going to be a snack for a saber-toothed tiger, right? So it's like long-termism isn't really a plan for the physical body in that way. Now we don't have those, we still have saber-toothed tigers, but they come in different guises in our society, in our world, right? It's still a very dangerous world. But we can look into our life and the way that we live and see that if we just follow a desirous path of, I want that, I deserve that, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I want, we can live that way, but we're not looking at the likely consequences. Renunciation through the Buddhist lens is not giving things up because we should, but because from a place of wisdom, it's a cost-benefit analysis and a rational choice. Like if I let go of, this is not helping, this may be difficult, but I'm going to work on it and practice this in order because I can see that the likelihood of greater benefit now and down the road is very real. But again, being a human being, because I don't like, I say for I don't like to give things up. I want to do what I want to do all the time. But that's not that's not life. That's not how life works. It turns out, right? We have to be able to have that restraint and be able to make choices so that this one here and that one there, that we can all broadly benefit, just even incrementally moving things in the right direction. When we move through renunciation, which the next parameter to come is wisdom. So it's just like this. We're just laying we're doing the groundwork, so that some wisdom can start to come. Looking at the things that cause us suffering in our life, and then perhaps holding back. And we can see this just in our general everyday life. What is it to be a modern renunciate? Of course, there's no one way, but that's a question for each of us. Like, how would I honor being a spirit, in a spiritual sense, like being a renunciate? Like, what do I hold back from? In an interesting way, Yushin, Susan brought this up to me in conversation. We were talking about this precept, was the living committing to a simple life, which I like. I like that. That's that kind of a simple, straightforward life. Like, I look at that for myself. It's like, well, I kind of don't, in many ways, don't need that much, right? But I like a few nice things, and a few things that kind of support the way that I live in the world. And again, if we're comparing that to a standard that's coming from the outside, well, you should not want these things. That's not what a good person wants, right? And there's any kind of broad rule that's put out like that. Again, that's just not accurate for the individual, for a person. Each one of us has a different range of needs, right? It's different for everybody. That's unique. But one thing that I've encountered certainly in teaching or in my practice at Yokoji is, for many others, for many people, it's often a little opaque or confused around the difference between a need and a want. Like, identifying what we need versus what we want. Because, we're surrounded by this world, this society, which is saying, you need this. This will make you feel better, without ever getting to the root of what it is we actually need. We often try and fill that gap with things we think we want, in that kind of short-term way. I found this interesting quote from a scribe to the Buddha. It said that in the Tapusa Sutra, the Buddha said that he did not find the practice of renunciation appealing. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I'm in good company, It's like, even the Buddha was just like, that doesn't seem so appealing, But again, after coming out of 10 years of practicing asceticism and reaching the point of glorious failure where he realized, well, that nearly killed me and it really didn't do that much good, then for the rest of his life just had a healthy little skepticism about how far you take renunciation. I think I'll pause at this point, and I'd love to open it up for any discussion, any questions, anything that you'd like to share, how this is landing for you, for also on Zoom. It says I've got my hand up, but that's just me waving my arms around when I'm speaking. I still have questions, but I'd like to hear other people's questions. And just a couple of things around questions to help me. Just if we can keep them short or put a pause, and that way I can repeat them for the benefit of people on Zoom, because they won't pick you up from back there. Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thanks, everyone. Yeah, we're just coming up on time, and I just put, I'm going to put going forth that Ian's metta, his dedication. I think they were kindly handed out earlier. I'm going to use my one, which I copied from a text document, so I hope it's the same one you're looking at. And maybe we can read this together. Just again, think about that we're looking for board members. A reminder about Dharma, generosity, the first perfection. If you have not yet mastered the first perfection, then we have the Dharma baskets at the rear to help the organisation and the sangha and the teachers continue. So please think about that, and online too. And I'll close with our going forth. Let's read together. Going forth into this world, so in need of light, may I bring all the kindness and wisdom I embody to each
situation that I need.
May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world, so in need of light, may we together bring all of the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being and each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice for the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace, and may it benefit all beings without exception. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to those joining on Zoom.